story of the Negro in the United States begins with the slave trade in the 17th century.
A ship's doctor aboard a slave vessel described his impressions.
The slave ships lie a mile below the town, in Bonny River, off the coast of Guinea. The wretched Negroes, on being brought aboard ship, are immediately fastened together, 2 and 2, by handcuffs on their wrists and by irons riveted on their legs. They are frequently stowed so close as to admit of no other position than lying on their sides, nor will the height between decks allow them to stand. On board some ships, the common sailors are allowed to have intercourse with such of the black women whose consent they can procure. The officers are permitted to indulge their passions among them at pleasure. Whenever the sea is rough and the rain heavy, it becomes necessary to shut every conveyance by which air is admitted. The Negroes' rooms very soon grow intolerably hot, and the confined air produces fevers and fluxes which carry off great numbers of them. One evening, one of the Negroes forced his way through the network on the larboard side of the vessel, jumped overboard, and was devoured by the sharks. Circumstances of this kind are very frequent. Very few of the Negroes can bear the loss of their liberty and the hardships they endure.
February 11, 1790. To the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States, being an address of the people called Quakers, in their annual assembly convened, we apprehend ourselves religiously bound to request your serious Christian attention to the gross national iniquity of trafficking in the persons of fellow men.
Mr. President, this petition prays that we should take measures for the abolition of the slave trade. But this is desiring an unconstitutional act, because the Constitution secures that trade to the states independent of congressional restrictions for a term of 21 years. Therefore, it ought to be rejected as an attempt upon the virtue and patriotism of the House. The Constitution has authorized us to levy a tax upon the importation of such persons. I would willingly go to that extent. Sir, I differ much in opinion. If, through the interference of the general government, the slave trade was abolished, it would evince to the people a disposition towards total emancipation, and they would hold their property in jeopardy. But, sir, is the whole morality of the United States confined to the Quakers? Do they understand the rights of mankind and the disposition of Providence better than others? If they were to consult that book which claims our regard, they will find that slavery has been no novel doctrine since the days of Cain. But be these things as they may, I hope the House will order the petition to lie on the table in order to prevent alarm to our Southern brethren.
The slave trade continued unchecked. Yet the whole question of slavery still disturbed a few thoughtful people. Among them was Thomas Jefferson.
Nothing is more certainly written in the book of fate than that these people are to be free. Nor is it less certain that the two races, equally free, cannot live in the same government. Nature, habit, opinion have drawn indelible lines of distinction between them. The blacks are at least as brave and more adventuresome than the whites, but this may perhaps proceed from a want of forethought, which prevents their seeing a danger till it be present. They are more ardent after their females, but love seems to be with them more an eager desire than a tender, delicate mixture of sentiment and sensation. In general, their existence appears to participate more of sensation than reflection. To justify a general conclusion requires many observations. I advance it, therefore, as a suspicion only, that the blacks, whether originally a distinct race or made distinct by time and circumstance, are inferior to the whites in the endowments both of body and mind.
Oh, Mrs. promised me when she died, gonna set me free.
White men rarely heard the slaves themselves talk about their condition, but one conversation was recorded by a northern journalist, Frederick Law Olmsted.
After leaving a plantation near New Orleans, I was driven about 20 miles in a buggy by William, one of the house servants. He first said that he came from Virginia.
I reckon there's no black folks in the class so very as those who was born in Virginia.
I didn't know. Very few.
Why is it, Buster? And when the black people is free, and they want to send them out of this stuff.
Some people think Africa is a better place for you. What would you do if you were free?
If I was free, Box? If I was free, I would look for. Well, sir, first thing I'd do if I was free, I'd go to work for a year and get some money for myself. And then, Mother, this is what I do. I buy me first place a little house and a little lot of land. And then, Then I would go to old Virginia and see old mother. Yes, sir. I'd like to do that the first thing. And when I come back, first thing I'd do, I'd get me a wife. Then I'd take her to my little house and I'd live there. And I'd grow things in my garden. I'd take them to New Orleans and sell them there in the market. That's the way I live if I was free.
Wouldn't you rather live in a plantation with a kindly master like yours and be free with him?
Oh, sir. I'd rather be free. Oh, yes, sir. I'd like it better than free. How would that, master?
But then, you'd have to take care of yourself and you'd get poor.
No, sir, I wouldn't get poor. I'd get rich. So you see, master, then I'd work all the time for myself.
The black people talk about themselves about this, do they? And they think so generally?
Oh, yes, sir. They talk so, but that's what they think.
And they talk about being free a good deal, do they?
Oh, yes, sir. They say they wish it was so. That's all they talk about. That's all, sir.
Some of William's fellow slaves were interviewed many years later about their recollections of slavery.
I hears tell of them good slave days, but I ain't never seen no good times then. I remember Aunt Cheney was just out of bed one time with a suckling baby. She run away. Old Solomon gets the nigger hounds and takes a trail. The men hollered them on to her, and the dogs tow her naked and get the breasts no off her body. Well, she got well, and she lived to be an old woman. But another woman was to suck her baby, and she ain't seen no sign of breasts no more.
Some of the plantations had starved their slaves till they wasn't fit for work. They had to slip about the slaves on other places to piece out their meals.
Once, Massa go to Baton Rouge, and he brung back a yellow gal dressed in fine style. She was a seamstress nigger. He built her a house way from the forest. This yellow gal breathes fire and gets a mess of white young'uns. She loves them fine manners, ain't she? About the head. Once, two of them goes down the hill to the dollhouse where the missus cheering and playing. They wants to go in the dollhouse, but Mrs. Boyd say, that's for white children. They say, we ain't no niggas, 'cause we got the same daddy as you have. And he comes see us near every day. They is fussing, and the missus is listening out the chamber window. When the master come home, jealousy. Well, since you asked me, I'm studying in my mind about them white children of that yellow nigger wench from Baton Rouge. He said, oh, honey, I thought you that gal just for you, 'cause she's a fine seamster. She said, well, it seemed kind of strange. They got the same kind of hair and eyes as my children, and a nose like yours. He said, oh, honey, you just paying attention to talk of little children that ain't got no mind to what they say. She said, well, over in Mississippi, I got a home and plenty with my daddy, and I got that in my mind. Well, she didn't never leave, and the master bought her a fine new span of Surrey horses, but she didn't never have no more children, and she ain't so cordial with the master. Now, that young gal, she had more white youngins, but they don't never come down the hill no more.
One thing that make it tough on us, were them times when a man and his wife and their children had to be taken away from one another. It was heaps of nigger families that I know what was separated at the time of abundance tried to find their folks what was gone. But most of them never get together again even after they set free, because they don't know where one another is.
Slavery time was tough, boss. You just don't know how tough it was. I can explain to you just how bad all the slaves wanted to get their freedom.
Right foot, left foot, along the road, follow the drinking road. Up to the north, drop your nose, follow the drinking road.
Slaves continually tried to flee the plantations and head north to freedom. Efforts of their masters to trace them led in a few rare cases to an exchange of lands.
You're my old master, Colonel P.H. Anderson, Big Spring, Tennessee, Slug. I got your letter. I was glad to find that you had not forgotten Jordan, that you wanted me to come back and live with you again. Although you shot me twice before I left you, I'm glad you're still living. I want to know particularly what this good chance is you propose to give me. I'm done tolerably well here. With $25 a month of living, clothing, a comfortable home for Mandy, folks call her Mrs. Anderson. And the children, Lily, Jane, and Grundy, go to school and learning well. Mandy said she would be afraid to go back without some proof that you were disposed to treat us justly and kindly. And we have concluded to test your sincerity by asking you to send us our wages for the time we did serve you. And this will make us forget and forgive old scolds and rely on your justice and friendship in the future. I served you faithfully for 32 years and Mandy for 20 years. At $25 a month for me and $2 a week for Mandy, our earnings would amount to $11,680. Add to this the interest for the time our wages was kept back, and deduct what you paid for our clothing and 3 doctor's visits for me and pulling a tooth for Mandy. And the balance will show what we are in justice entitled to. Please send the money by Adams Express in care of B. Winters, Esquire, Dayton, Ohio. Say howdy to George Carter and thank him for taking the pistol from you when you were shooting at me. From your old servant, George.
In the North, although the Negroes were free, they were segregated and despised. The Reverend Samuel J. May described their treatment in Canterbury, Connecticut.
In the summer or fall of 1832, I heard that Miss Prudence Crandall, an excellent, well-educated Quaker, had been induced by a number of ladies and gentlemen of Canterbury, Connecticut, to establish her boarding and day school there. Not far from Canterbury, there lived a colored man named Harris. He had a daughter, Sarah, a bright girl about 17 years of age. She applied for admission into this new Canterbury school, and Miss Crandall admitted her. The pupils, I believe, made no objection, but in a few days the parents of some of them called and remonstrated. They would not have it said that their daughters went to school with a nigger girl. Miss Crandall was assured that if she did not dismiss Sarah Harris, her white pupils would be withdrawn from her. Undismayed by such opposition, Miss Crandall received, early in April, 15 or 20 colored young ladies from Philadelphia, New York, Providence, and Boston. At once, all accommodations at the stores in Canterbury were denied her. She and her pupils were insulted whenever they appeared in the streets. The doors and doorsteps of her house were besmeared. Her well was filled with filth. Finally, her house was assaulted by a number of persons with heavy clubs and iron bars. 5 window sashes were demolished and 90 panes of glass dashed to pieces. After due consideration, therefore, it was determined that the school should be abandoned. The pupils were called together, and I was requested to announce to them our decision. 20 harmless, well-behaved girls, whose only offense was that they had come together there to obtain useful knowledge, were to be told that they had better go away. The words almost blistered my lips. I felt ashamed of Canterbury, ashamed of Connecticut, ashamed of my country, ashamed of my color.
Many northern Negroes were active in the anti-slavery struggle, and some took part in other reform movements as well. One of the most famous was the illiterate ex-slave Sojourner Truth, who in 1851 unexpectedly rose at a women's rights convention.
Well, Dylan, where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. Now, it seems that with the black folk of the South and the women at the North all talking about rights, that the white men gonna be in fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about? That man over there said that women's got to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helped me in the carriages. All the mud puddles, all getting me any best place and ain't our woman. Look at all. Flowers and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could hit me. Ain't our woman. I've born 13 children and seen them most sold into slavery. And when I cried out in my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me, and they are woman. Now, the man in black there, he said that women can't have as much rights as men because Christ was a woman. Where did your Christ come from? Where did he come from? From God and a woman. Man didn't have nothing to do with him. And that God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone. These women together ought to be able to get it back and turn it right side up again. And now that they asking to do it, the men better never.
Made an unsuccessful attempt to lead the slaves in rebellion in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. brought to trial and sentenced to death, John Brown addressed the court. I have made please the court a few words to say. In the first place, I deny everything but what I have all along admitted. The design on my part to free the slaves. I never did intend murder or treason. This court acknowledges, as I suppose, the validity of the law of God. I see a book kissed here, which I suppose to be the Bible, or at least the New Testament, that teaches me to remember them that are in bonds, as bound with them. I endeavored to act up to that instruction. I say I am yet too young to understand that God is any respecter of persons. Now, if it is deemed necessary that I should forfeit my life for the furtherance of the ends of justice, and mingle my blood further with the blood of millions in this slave country, I submit. So let it be done.
Civil War broke out in April 1861. Mary Boynton Chestnut, wife of the senator from South Carolina, described in her diary the outbreak of war. April 13, 1861.
Fort Sumter has been on fire. And not by one word or look can we detect any change in the demeanor of these Negro servants. You could not tell that they even heard of the noise that's gone on in the bay. Though it's dinning in their ears day and night.
June 1863, Portland, Alabama.
Dick, the butler, reminds me that when we were children, I taught him to read as soon as I could read myself. But he won't look at me now. He looks over my head. He scents freedom in the air. He's the first Negro I've got to change him. They just rolled out in their black masks. Not a ripple or an emotion shimmer. Now this might make a very respectable Egyptian sphinx. So inscrutably silent is he.
The 1st Regiment of ex-slaves was mustered into the service of the Union Army in 1862. It was under the command of a white officer from Boston, Colonel Thomas Wentworth Higginson.
This morning, my surgeon sent me his report of killed and wounded. One man killed instantly by ball to the heart, 7 wounded, one of whom will die. One man with 3 bullet holes to the large muscles of the shoulders and neck cannot murmur as escaped his lips. Another, one of those who were carried to the vessel, a man wounded through the lungs, asked only if I was safe, the contrary having been reported. An officer may be pardoned some enthusiasm for such men as these. January 1, 1863. Today we celebrated the issuance of President Lincoln's Proclamation of Emancipation.
We was free! Just like that we was free! Right away, the colored folks started on the move. They seemed to want to get closer to freedom, so they'd know what it was, like it was a place or a city.
These the people say they gonna name themselves Roosevelt. They named themselves big names. Some of the names was Abraham, some called themselves Lincoln. Any big names, except in their master's name.
What I like best, to be slave or free? Well, it's this way. In slavery, I owns nothing, never owns nothing. In freedom, I own a home and raise a family. All that causes me worriment. And in slavery, I have no worriment. But I takes the freedom.
After the Civil War, the Negro's freedom disrupted the pattern of Southern life, as a woman from Georgia noted in her diary.
Washington, Georgia, June 27, 1865. This town's becoming more crowded with freedmen every day, and their insolence increases with their numbers. We have not even an errand boy now. For George, only child left on the place is going to school. Everybody doing housework. Father says that this is what's made the Anglo-Saxon race great. We're not afraid of them. But
does seem to me a waste of time. For people who are capable of doing something better to spend their time sweeping and dusting, while scores of lazy niggers that are fit for nothing better are just lying around idle. Dr. Calhoun, he suggested that it'd be a good idea to import some of those apes from Africa and teach them to take the place of the niggers. But Henry said that just as soon as we got them tamed and taught them to be of some use, those crazy fanatics at the North insist on coming down here to emancipate them and to give them universal suffrage. But many people seem to feel that those Yankees are never going to be satisfied till they get the niggers to voting. Tom says that that's the worst thing we have to fear now.